So why is it that the tip of the spear, the guy that advocates for local government in Wisconsin, is a born and raised Illinois college football hero? We're going to find out. My guest on the local perspective is a very long and very dear friend of mine, co-worker, Curt Witynski, the deputy director of the League. Good morning, Curt.
Good morning, Jerry.
So we thought rather than, diving into all the boring details of our legislative session.
That people can read about on their own.
Yeah, you can read about this and then you can call Curt and say, Curt, wait a minute, what is that? I wanted instead to literally pull back the curtain a little bit. And I've worked with Curt, 4 years at the League, but I don't know how long we've worked together, 20 some odd years.
Yes.
And I got to tell you, I'm just so amazed with this human being. He's one of the nicest, sharpest people I know, but he's from Illinois. Come on. So how does this happen, Curt? The League has been your entire career, right?
Correct.
From law school right on through today.
That's right. Since 87.
And you're a college football hero.
I wouldn't say that, but I did play football in college.
You were the quarterback.
I was
Did
safety.
they have 11?
I actually played safety
Played
in
safety?
college, yeah.
Oh, you weren't like on special teams and they just say, hey, Witynski, run down the field and tackle somebody.
Well, that could have happened too.
So law school, you went right to work for the League of Municipalities. I can't imagine this is the sort of career that one dreams about in high school. How did you end up at the League?
No, like a lot of people, when you're entering your professional career, you have a general sense, general direction of your interests. And mine, I knew as I was working through law school that the public sector was what drew me, policy development. And in my last year of law school, there was a little notice up on the job bulletin board, as all my friends were getting jobs in law firms and people were, had their plans in place. I was still trying to figure mine out the last several weeks of law school. And then this notice came up about a position available at the League of Municipalities, and it was assistant legal counsel. So I applied and got the job. Stan York and Jim Schneider were the people who hired me. And it's been educational always. It's been stimulating always, and it's a great group of people, not only in the League itself, but all the members of the League. There's always different people you meet, different mayors, and local government people are fine people. They're good people. They're just volunteering and trying to work within their community to get things done. Mm-hmm. And so some of the, particularly today's discourse and kind of political conflict that exists nationally, I'm not going to say it's non-existent at the local level, but it's much less. And over the years, I've just found being around and working with local government people has been very satisfying, very gratifying.
So you spent 32 years with the League, 31 years, 32 years?
31, yes.
And tell me about your progression. You were the assistant legal counsel, then your current position, which is effectively chief lobbyist and deputy director.
Right.
What were the breakdowns there?
So for the first 5 years, I was assistant legal counsel under Jim Schneider. He decided to move on and started to work for the Attorney General at that time. So then I became legal counsel and served in that capacity for 8 years or so, I think, until 2000. And then the person who was the assistant director, head chief lobbyist at the time, moved on, retired, and I told Dan Dan Thompson, who was the chief executive at the time, that I'd be very interested in shifting from legal counsel to lobbying and more administrative aspects of the League. And he was very interested in that and gave me the position. So that was in 2000, roughly 2001.
Okay. So then coming out of college, I assume now, was your dad or your mom in local government? Did you have any background there?
No, my parents were not in local government. My mom worked in the school district. Both my parents, by the way, were from Wisconsin. They grew up in Florence County, up,
All right, so
up
we'll
by you,
forgive you
Jerry.
for that.
So yeah. So
Oh, they
so-
were almost Yoopers. My
Yeah,
wife
they-
would love them too.
Yes. So I grew up a Green Bay Packer fan, despite living among all Bear fans, and so Wisconsin's in my blood. No, but in my freshman year of college, we had this January term, J term. A lot of small colleges have this where you can do an internship, and I interned with our mayor, Freeport, Illinois mayor. Freeport's the size of 26,000 or so, kind of like Sun Prairie, and it was a revelation. It was very interesting. I really had no idea before what the mayor and the city council did, and I got to go to the different departments and see what was going on. And then later that, through the rest of my summers, I worked for the street department in our city. So I got all the different angles of city government, and it sparked an interest. And then in law school, I worked for various state agencies as different jobs, and so I knew I wanted to work in government in some way or another.
Okay, so you worked back in City Hall when you were working there. You said you worked for Public Works and all other different departments. Were you like the nerd behind the counter, or were you actually out in the field doing manual labor?
No, I was the nerd. I didn't do manual labor until I actually worked for the Public Works Department in the summers between college years.
So you really did have an exposure to at least
Yes.
all aspects of local government.
Yes. Yep.
But now you start with the League, you're fresh out of law school, and I know the legal department at the League just gets inundated with calls, where we average about 3,000 calls a year. How long did it take you to kind of get a groove? Did you feel like you were being drowned at first?
Yes, totally overwhelmed. And Stan York, their theory at the time was, let's hire someone right out of law school. We can pay him less, and then
Work you like a dog.
work you like, and train that person to become an expert, knowledgeable about local government law. And so that was their approach. But I got to tell you, it's intimidating for a 23-year-old, 24-year-old receiving calls from longtime city attorneys saying, hey, what about this zoning issue? Have you ever submitted any opinions or written anything on that? And I have to say, well, I haven't personally, but I'll check into see what we have in our library. So yeah, it was quite an education and training period.
Okay. What's the most common question you got back then? And I guess, do you know if it's changed?
I doubt that it's changed. So if the call's from a clerk, a municipal clerk, it's usually some kind of licensing question, liquor licensing, or a procedural issue like relating to open meetings or a process that's been asked about by the governing body. If it's city attorney or a village attorney, it's a little more technical question that could be anything from have you ever looked at whether the mayor could veto this particular, what are what's the scope of the mayor's powers, or just more complicated regulatory authority of a municipality.
Okay. I'm talking with Curt Witynski on the Local Perspective today. Curt is the Deputy Director of the League, which means, among other things, he's the Chief Lobbyist and has a long and terrific career, has a great reputation in the state capitol. So 18 years ago, you make this transition from answering questions about the law as league counsel to going out and actually trying to convince legislators to change the law
Right.
as our chief lobbyist. How was that transition?
Another huge learning curve. I think people who are not who don't participate in lobbying or aren't in the Capitol every day to see how laws are actually made think that logic will prevail, good information will convince people, and so if you are capable of presenting logical arguments and good information, should win the day.
And they also believe in fairy tales.
Yeah,
And
apparently, I was one of those people, and I think so. Going into the position, I had different ideas about how lobbying was actually conducted, or the impact that you could actually have on the process.
well, and I think a lot of people know that I have a lobbying background
Right.
as well. I came at it from more of a political perspective. I worked for the Thompson administration way back in the day. You came at it from a very non-political background.
Very true.
And yet, you have a pretty terrific reputation among legislators. So despite us kind of laughing and being cynical about, oh, yeah, it's all politics, it's all money, it's all this, it's all that, you've succeeded. How do you do that? How have you done that?
Well, I think the only thing we can do from the position we come from, meaning local governments and working with our state government partners, is provide accurate information, treat people decently, and I think those are the two key ways to work and to interact with legislators and their staff. And I think legislators and their staff can depend on us to provide accurate information and not get involved so much in the political back and forth that happens in every other aspect of activity in the Capitol.
Okay.
Yeah.
But a lot of our members, particularly the elected chief executives, have political leanings of their own.
Yes.
In Wisconsin, local officials are nonpartisan.
Right.
But, you know, this mayor tends to vote Republican, that mayor tends to vote Democrat.
Right.
Does that work for us? Does that work against us? Or is that sort of a non-issue?
I think it can work for us, and depending on who's the majority party that's in control, we will emphasize our mayors who come or have that philosophy that's consistent with that party. But it also is in our favor, I think, that we are that these local officials officially run as nonpartisan people. And in some cases, we've had mayors who really don't expose their political party. And so they can almost have their legislators thinking, oh, they're on our side, they're on my side, partisan-wise, when in fact we don't know for sure if this mayor is Republican or Democrat. Those have been some of the most effective mayors that I've seen, where both parties want to woo them and think that they're consistent and on the same team.
Well, one of the things that I've often said too is no matter what party the legislator or the village president or mayor or whatever, the last thing that legislator wants is for the village president to be in the newspaper saying, what'd you do that to us
Right.
for?
And you're not getting anything done for us. You're ignoring your home community. Yeah, nobody wants to hear that.
So let's look at today, and you know, we all sort of tear our clothing and bemoan the partisanship that seems to be there today. More than partisanship, the level of rancor seems to be nastier, and even let's be honest, at the local level to a degree. Is how you do what you do changing? Is dealing with legislators in this current environment more difficult than it used to be?
No, well, yes, it is, but I think the key is, for me, is to try and find a legislator who's willing to dive into the details, is interested in policy, not just politics, and wants to work through complicated issues to come up with some solutions. And there still are legislators like that, and those are the people I seek out to try and work with.
Okay, do those people have any influence in the legislative process, or is it the political showboat, the big fundraiser?
No, I think there are still people who are in the majority party who are, regardless of who that is, in this case it's the Republicans obviously, who are dedicated to finding solutions to complex issues, and yes, they still have persuasive ability within their caucus, because they can present, if they stand up and they're knowledgeable and everyone else in the caucus doesn't know very much about the issue, they can be the leader on it, and that has worked.
Can we, I think our viewers would, you know, maybe don't want to dive too deeply into the process of sausage making, you know, creating legislation, but just to give an idea, and let's use dark store and the Walgreens loopholes as an example. I know you worked with State Representative Rob Brooks, State Senator Roger Roth, State Senator Dewey Strobel. Tell us, how, and it ended up with 2 pieces of legislation. Kind of give me the thumbnail sketch of how those 2 bills came to be, just to give our viewers a sense of the amount of work that goes into this stuff before anything reaches the light of day.
Right. So the process for putting those 2 bills together really started 2 sessions ago, so almost 4 years.
Almost 4 years ago.
Yeah, almost 4 years ago. And really started at about the same time that I was talking to legislators along with assessors who were talking to me about these issues about commercial assessment of commercial properties and these 2 loopholes that were becoming more and more prevalent. These certain legislators were hearing from their local officials. So they were aware from 2 parties, both us as lobbyists and then their mayors and citizens and local officials from back home. So West Bend is an example. West Bend was, their mayor and their assessors were very vocal about some of these tactics that commercial property owners have been using in their community. So they had been communicating with Senator Strobel, Representative Brooks, and others. And then I happened to start talking to those legislators about possible solutions, and that's when we connected. And then it just so happened that both of those legislators were fiscally conservative, vocal and strong members of their majority caucuses, which was
Senator
perfect.
Roth is the Senate president.
Right, Senator Roth is the Senate president. He'd been hearing from Mayor Hanna in Appleton as well about this issue.
Well, and I went to one of the dark store hearings, and the opponents of the legislation, those representing big box retailers, made the claim that, oh, these are just a few rogue assessors.
Right.
And the senator chairing the hearing was the senator representing Sheboygan.
Yes.
And he shot right back at him. He said, well, I'm hearing this from every assessor in my district.
Yeah.
They're not all rogue assessors.
Right, right.
So dark store started from the grassroots.
Started from the grassroots.
Now, did you guys throw this bill together, a couple of meetings and it was done?
No. Initially, it was one bill. The early draft from 4 years ago was one bill. Both issues were addressed in one bill. As things evolved and various stakeholders were contributed their thoughts to what the language should look like, it evolved further. The language evolved further. And then the authors of the bill, when we talked at the beginning of last session, when we talked to Senator Strobel, he said, I'm most comfortable with Walgreens. So I just want to introduce that as be the author. Representative Brooks said, okay, I'll be the assembly lead on that, and I'll be the assembly lead on dark store. So then we went and asked Senator Roth if he wanted to be the Senate lead on dark store. So we had to split the original one bill into 2. And then over the course of the first 6 months of the session, there were multiple meetings that Representative Brooks, who took the lead on fine-tuning the draft, he met with WMC, the realtors, variety of other stakeholders, and fine-tune the language even more. So there are lots of changes. Then finally it was introduced, and finally we had a public hearing. So there were many steps and many stages to getting at the language we wanted. And this is a highly complex area with lots of case law that had to be reviewed. We had to run it by Department of Revenue for technical advice and assistance, and so there were many parties involved in coming up with the final bill language. And even after that, there were changes that were made and amendments drafted.
So then you got 2 bills, you circulate them to all of the legislators, all 132 legislators,
Right.
to get them to sign on, be a co-sponsor, which
Yes.
means I support this bill enough so that I put my name on it. We had, I believe, a majority or a near majority of co-sponsors.
We did. So the initial surge, when the bill first went around, we were really pleased that we had, 40 to 50 co-sponsors on, depending on which bill you're talking about, which is that's exceptionally high. You don't see that many co-sponsors. I mean, to have a dozen co-sponsors is considered success. And both parties were well represented. And I think that spoke to the fact that our local officials were talking to their legislators and educating them about the issue. there was discussion by our authors within their caucus saying, hey, this bill's going to come out, we'd like you to sign on. And then we, of course, were doing our meetings with legislators around the Capitol, trying to explain and give the background so that they were ready when the bill came across their desk to say, oh yeah, I'm familiar with this, I want to get on this and be a co-sponsor.
Talking with Curt Witynski. Curt's the Deputy Executive Director of the League, about the legislative process, about Curt's history. And now I would love to keep talking about Dark Store, but we're already about 22 minutes in here. And I want to talk about next session.
Yes.
Now, of course, Dark Store got tripped up for political reasons, I guess is the only way to describe it. Didn't get voted on. Legislative leadership voted not, or decided not to put it to a vote. It would have passed. So we're bringing it back again in next January. Mm-hmm. What are some of our other priorities for next year, Curt?
So our priorities for next year are going to focus on tax issues for the most part. So our big picture, our big goal, overarching goal is to encourage and work with the legislature to take a look at alternative sources of revenue for local governments. Where, since the states existed, municipalities have relied almost exclusively on the property tax as their source of revenue or state aid. And that narrow spectrum of resources or revenue sources is just becoming, it's just not manageable anymore.
It's not sustainable.
Not sustainable, that's the word I was looking for. So, and we have some legislators who are willing to talk about and look at those issues. Representative Mako is one of them. Mm-hmm. And then underneath that are some issues that basically we're resurfacing again next session, that we worked on this session, and that is the Just Fix It campaign, which is a sustainable source of revenue at the state level for both state and local transportation needs. And then, as you mentioned, Dark Store and Walgreens, which again gets at that tax burden, property tax burden, primarily on homeowners that exist in Wisconsin, and how do we alleviate some of that burden.
What's happening right now, Curt, with all of those? And I guess in particular, what are our members doing, or what would we like our members to be doing with this information?
Right.
It's election season. Is it just time to take the summer off?
It's never time to take the summer off, unfortunately. So the League, our board of directors, as you know, decided that they wanted to double down on Dark Store next session, and they aren't ready to give up and say we lost. And so by doubling down, they want us to engage in a public education campaign and convince and work with our members to talk about this issue and force the candidates for state offices to talk about this issue during the fall campaign.
Republican and Democrat?
Republican and Democrat, state legislator, and gubernatorial. We want this to be a part of the discussion, the Dark Store and the Walgreens, and the tax shift. Yeah, go ahead. So I was just going to say, so we are in the process of putting together some resources from a variety of sources, including our members, come up with a public education campaign on these issues.
And that comes back to kind of bringing it back around to where your career started, where Dark Store came from. It seems to me what they all have in common is this all starts at our membership level, at what's going on in your city, what's going on in your village, what's working, what's not working, and how is the law getting in the way. So how are our members most helpful to you in the legislative process?
Our members are the key to our success in the legislature.
You mean it's not you?
No.
It's not your charm and wit?
No, not at
I'll
all.
write that down. Make a note. I'm kidding.
No, of course, yes. So, yeah, our members are, the reason we have any success is they articulate and speak for basically their constituents, their citizens, who also happen to be the constituents and citizens that state legislators serve. But I think our members are closer to the ground. They hear and understand what's happening in their communities, the challenges that their communities are facing right now with respect to property tax being the sole source of revenue, and that homeowners are bearing 68% of the property tax levy. So that is compelling city and village officials to communicate with legislators about those issues, and we need them to continue to do that. And that's really the only way we'll have success in the state legislature.
Just last week, you were over in Fond du Lac
Yes.
and had a meeting with, well, tell us about that. What were you doing over there?
So this summer we're recognizing 8 state legislators who we're calling our municipal champions, who rose above the 132 state legislators that you mentioned that are in the state capitol to either advocate for and support or even be the author of legislation that benefits local control, that benefits local communities, or were very active in blocking, helping us block bad legislation that would take away municipal powers. And so one of the legislators that we were recognizing was in Fond du Lac. Yes, we list them in our magazine in the June issue. One of those legislators happened to be a former Fond du Lac City Council member, Representative Jeremy Thiesfeld, and so we were in Fond du Lac at a city council meeting to recognize him and give him an award in front of his hometown, which was televised on their local access cable.
And I talked to the city manager, Joe Moore. I mean, everybody was very pleased with that event, kind of bringing it around full circle.
Right. It was a perfect example of, here we had a former city council member who sat on the city council for 5 years, get elected to the state legislature, knowledgeable about local issues and wanted to work on local issues at the state level and succeeded in getting some legislation passed, and we wanted to recognize that.
Great. Okay, Curt, you've been doing this a long time. I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Are you bored with it?
No, not at all. That's
How can you not be?
Because
30 years, my goodness.
Because, well, you're still doing it, Tony.
Hush.
Because you know, and Gail knows who's off camera here, that local government issues are always changing and evolving. There's always challenges. There's always new people. There's always challenging issues, and there's always the opportunity to learn, and that's what interests me. There's new issues, new things to learn about, and new people to meet, and that's for me is the definition of a great job.
Excellent. And a really cool boss. You didn't say a really cool boss.
Well, that goes without saying, yes, and wonderful people to work with.
I should thank our host today. We're at Fitchburg at FACTv. I want to thank Scott and Andrew and Gus, the dog behind the camera, for being kind of an ongoing partner of ours. They help us put this together. Wisconsin Community Media does a great job spreading the word throughout the state. Read more. Curt and I decided before this interview that there is no way we could cover all of the legislative successes, all of the details of the legislation that didn't quite make it across the finish line.
Right.
But Curt does an excellent job in the June issue of the Municipality magazine. Grab that, take a look at it. Curt's very accessible. Give him a call if there's something you see. But the other thing is, the way this all works together, and Curt and I have talked about it today, is if you have a problem at the local level, give us a call. Let's talk about it, because it leads to legislation, it leads to solving the problem. And that is really what the League is here for.
Exactly.
So I want to thank Curt Witynski, not only for being here today, but for 30 some odd years of terrific work.
Thanks, Jerry.
On behalf of city and village government.
Thanks, you're very kind. Thank you.
I'm Jerry Deschane. This has been The Local Perspective. Have a great day.